Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Whitty, here with John Kiriakou, and I apologize, but we have got to talk more about the drought in the American West and the drought in the American East, and then we'll get to COP and the great breakthrough and what faith we can have in organizations like that and platforms like that to effect any change. Joining us for these conversations is Guy McPherson. He's a scientist. He's professor emeritus of natural resources and ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Arizona. Thanks for being here, Guy.
Thank you for the conversation again, Michelle and John.
This story in the Washington Post last week caught my eye. It is about wells running dry in California. And I was trying to figure out what exactly one can ask about a story like this, because should we be concerned seems much too obvious. The story begins with sort of a day in the life of a well driller who we are told is running 24/7 with demands to build new wells as old ones dry up. It tells us these wells are running dry in California at a record pace amid a hotter, drier climate and the third consecutive year of severe drought. The state has already tallied a record 1,351 dry wells this year, nearly 40% over last year's rate, and the most since the state created this voluntary reporting system in 2014. So this is not the oldest reporting system in the world, but those are still, I would feel, pretty alarming numbers. It says most of these outages are in the center of the state, in the San Joaquin Valley, where residents compete with deep agricultural wells for the rapidly dwindling supply of groundwater. And I wonder if you could explain what is happening to California to us and explain whether digging more wells in different places represents a solution.
Well, interestingly, the story in the Post tells us that California is in its third consecutive year of a severe drought, but it fails to mention that California, as with much of the western part of North America, is in the midst of a mega drought, the likes of which has not been experienced for at least 1,200 years. And when we last had a mega drought on this continent, it led directly to the demise of at least 3 civilizations. This mega drought has been going on, the current one, for more than 2 decades. This is, in fact, the driest 22-year period in recorded history in the region, according to a peer-reviewed paper published on February 14th of this year. That paper was published in Nature Climate Change, an open access journal, more than 9 months ago. The situation has not improved during the last 9 months. This is a very serious situation.
I also wanted to ask about the role of agriculture here. We touch on this almost every time we talk about the mega drought in the South and in the Southwest. But again, there are sort of water cycles, right? There are natural cycles of dryness and wetness. But it seems like the choices we have made with regard to agriculture in California are making this situation probably worse than it has to be.
Of course. That's the American way, isn't it? Maybe even the human way.
It has to be.
Growing food requires a lot of water. 70% of the world's fresh water is used for agriculture every year. That's more than 2 quadrillion gallons of water, enough to cover the entire United States in 2 feet of water. That's how much water we use for agriculture every single year. So what's the role of agriculture in this situation? I have no idea. Humans are basically bags of water. Every pound of food we eat contains many gallons of embedded water and plenty of embedded fossil fuels. Because water rights are expensive to retain and moving water around is very expensive, farmers are doing everything they can to minimize their own costs. They are already minimizing water usage because they have to if they're going to make a living at it. Asking farmers to do more with less, which is the customary approach, is, pardon the pun, running dry. I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the things to do should have been done decades ago, right? The things to do would have been make different choices about what to plant where.
Absolutely. We treat everything as if it's going to last forever, and aquifers are one example of something that just doesn't last forever. You can't pump forever at a faster rate than something is replenished. This applies to fossil fuels, as some people are finally starting to figure out. It also applies to water. We just can't keep living as if there's no tomorrow and expect that we're going to have a lot of tomorrows.
Yeah, and on the topic of aquifers, right? I mean, we have been talking about this Colorado River crisis, the mega drought in the American West, this sort of mini drought in California. And, on the Colorado River, states have been pushing back deadlines to jointly address the crisis. It's a political fiasco on top of an environmental one. And we spoke about the drought along the Mississippi River, which is sort of being covered as though it is a more, immediate and sort of ephemeral concern. But this story that I hadn't heard about before, that was raised recently, is what is happening with the Ogallala Aquifer of the Great Plains. A story in Barron's recently noted that the aquifer is one of the largest in the world and one of the most stressed. The story took a look at a report that was put together by Morningstar Sustainalytics and the Water Council. It was being put together for the packaged food industry, like looking at water conditions in North America and making predictions for this industry to take action on. But this report found that the southern portion of this aquifer, one of the biggest in the world, which supplies a lot of the farmland in the American sort of Midwest and East, that it will run out of water in the next 3 decades. And so what I'm wondering is, we're on the East Coast here watching what's happening in the West, watching what's happening on the Colorado River, and kind of thinking like, well, how could you have allowed it to come to this state? And I wonder if we are just sort of at the beginning of that process ourselves, and that we are missing a drought, under our noses over here on the East Coast.
Sure. Back when I was married and going to graduate school, beginning in the early 1980s, my father-in-law was a farmer and a rancher in western Nebraska. That's in the heart of the Ogallala Aquifer. My father-in-law was very concerned about depleting the 175,000 square mile aquifer. Think about how large that is, 175,000 square miles. And it lies beneath parts of 8 states. However, he knew there was very little he could do as an individual. Growing water-rich foods, which means all food, takes a lot of water. In a society where economic growth is treated as a fundamental right, along with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it appears we will continue to pursue economic growth until we are constrained by fundamental limits. Limits to growth are already constraining other countries. Not surprisingly, they're starting to affect us as well when it comes to things like supply chains and food availability. But I just don't know that there's a way out of this. We can't have an ever-growing human population demanding more, and more, while everything we've come to depend upon is going away.
No, I agree. I mean, it's hard to argue. You sort of talk about these stories and go, well, I guess we can talk about how we got here. We kind of know what solutions, what kind of concerted action solutions would require, and then you kind of look around at the societies that we have built and conclude that, well, that action just isn't really possible. And I think, in some ways, COP27 is an example of this. Again, not to be too pessimistic, right? But I was trying to come up with a question for you on this conference that I couldn't predict your answer to. And I came up short because, again, we have had the UN organize this climate change event that brings together world leaders. Joe Biden stopped by, AMLO's there, Lula's there. And it has ended with what is being called in some quarters a breakthrough, because for the first time, rich countries agreed to pay for climate damages in 4 nations. But basically, they've kicked the can down the road. They've given themselves a year to figure out what the fund should look like, what countries should contribute, and where the money should go, which really is all the difficult stuff. And so, we have talked to guests at COP who have said, yeah, the high-level stuff is garbage, but it is a useful networking opportunity for grassroots organizers. We can come together. We can make connections that will allow us to throw our weight around a little bit. And so, that seems promising. But, I wanted to ask how you would characterize these annual UN climate change conferences.
Well, as with the first 26th conference of parties, COP27 was a party. The usual suspects showed up, including scientists issuing warnings between networking opportunities. The grassroots organizers representing nonprofit organizations try to convince themselves their efforts are worthwhile between networking opportunities. And how would we do it anyway? As we already know, we have triggered many self-reinforcing feedback loops, any one of which makes climate change irreversible. Even the IPCC admitted in September 2019 that we have already triggered self-reinforcing feedback loops. As we also know, increasing industrial activity will lead to an ever-increasing rate of environmental change. Even the IPCC had admitted in October 2018 we are in the midst of the fastest rate of environmental change in planetary history. So we're in this damned if we do, damned if we don't situation. What does this mean? I would not pretend to know how other people will respond to this situation. For me, this means living fully, living with integrity, pursuing adventure. Ask anyone who's taken even a small dose of the right mushrooms. Trust them, not me. We are one. It's long past time we started acting like we are one.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble with talking about this stuff is to, I don't know, leave room for hope and resilience and the ability of human beings to come together as we have managed to do sometimes in the past. But yeah, it's also hard not to. I don't know. I think with some of this water news, you think, oh, okay, so this is how it happens, right? This is how it happens, where you sort of pretend the problem isn't there, and you pretend that the couple inches of water in the bottom of the well is going to be a couple feet somewhere else, and you just, I don't know. It feels like the process is going to be a lot less gradual than you might have thought, considering this is one of those sort of long, slow, grinding crises. Like it's sort of like the difference between life and death, sort of having water or not having water. That makes sense. And I wonder, over the next couple of, well, who knows what the timeline will be, right? Couple of decades. It seems like some of these calamities are going to come upon us a lot faster and more completely than we might have predicted. I wonder what you have to say about that.
Well, of course, we've known for generations that there are tipping points. When we reach these tipping points, things start going faster than we can control, faster than we can even keep track of. On October 28th, only about 3 weeks ago, the United States Department of Interior issued a serious warning to western states that rely upon water from the Colorado River. In effect, the Interior Department told the western states that if the states themselves cannot come up with a plan, the feds will impose serious restrictions. This is the first time that they've actually made this sort of threat. Members of the public have until December 20th of this year to provide input on that plan. And I don't know what to make of it. We're in the midst of a mega drought. It takes a lot of water to grow food, and water flowing down the Colorado River supports other activities in addition to growing food, including tourism and hydroelectric power. There's now more than 8 billion people on the planet. Every one of them is rapidly pursuing the American dream, complete with the pursuit of individual automobiles, single-family homes, and that age-old happiness. And who are we in this country to deny other people those pursuits? How would we do it anyway? The usual trick is war for oil, war for food, and war for water. But as with farmers being asked to grow more with less, military action has its limits. The ignorance of the public is astonishing, and I'm reminded almost every day. Someone told me the other day we could have 18 billion people sustainably on this planet. Are you kidding me? Apparently we can't even have 8 billion. We probably couldn't even have 1 billion. And maintain a decent set of living arrangements for all people on the planet. And here we are at 8 billion and no end in sight.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All right, Guy. Well,
I'm such a bummer.
No, I mean, it is a bummer. We won't ask you. No, I mean, we don't have you on to try and gild the pill. It's a sort of difficult psychological process, right, of discussion. And every time we have you on to discuss these issues, I feel like, well, I mean, I know I have an idea of what your sort of timeline is for climate catastrophe, and I know that during these conversations we're ignoring that, right? And so I appreciate you indulging us, because of course there's still in the meantime sort of questions, and we can all cross our fingers and hope that timeline, is longer than some people think it is. But yeah, I mean, I guess you just sort of try to talk about how did we get here in the immediate sense, and standing looking at the hole going, huh? all right, that's a big hole, I guess,
There's still a lot we can do as individuals. We can act decently with one another. And we've always been able to do that. And yes, times are getting more difficult every single day for many people. And yet, we can still act with decency towards other human beings and to the other parts of the living planet. This is important, and it's an important part of my message that seems to be missed relatively frequently. I think it's important to point it out that we have options here. To the extent we have any free will at all, we have the ability to control how we behave. And what that means is we can actually behave ourselves.
Yeah, act decently, and remember that is always a choice, is probably the best way we could possibly end this. Guy McPherson, we always appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much. That was Professor Emeritus of Natural Resources and Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Arizona, Guy McPherson. Thanks.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
We're going to take a quick break here on Political Misfits and come back and talk about some Supreme Court issues and a lot of other matters that seem much more trivial now than they did 15 minutes ago. But we're going to get to them anyway, because that's what we do here. We're listening.